Bitcoin and you're putting it into, I don't know, the equivalent of Canadian Tire money, just funny money. It should be going in the other direction. And that comes over time. That comes over time when you have a better understanding of how the Bitcoin market. And Sam Bankman-Fried, by the way, are young. They're all lefties, by the way. They're all Democrats. It's hysterical. This criminal, his exchange dealt primarily with what's it called? The clown coins, the centralized cryptos. Those are completely different, and this is very important for people to understand. That is the opposite of what Bitcoin is. What FTT was. I mean, if he had Bitcoin, he would have been great, but he had zero Bitcoin. He had a bunch on his balance sheet, but he had none. And he had all of these centralized coins that all governments can have access to because there's always a centralized point of failure. And you don't have that with Bitcoin.
A lot of talk about CBDCs and a lot of pushback. And I think the more talk there is about people moving into central bank digital currencies regulated by the government, run by government, surveilled by government, monitored by government, the more people tend to look at alternatives and think, well, maybe Bitcoin is the best. Let's listen. This is posted by Bitcoin News. Massive protests against CBDCs in England. So clearly somebody is waking up over there across the pond in England. Let's listen.
You lose cash, and this is what we must not let them do. When we lose cash, if we lose cash, and you've only got central bank digital currencies, the computer will know what it is you're trying to do before you even do it, and they will prevent you from doing it. If, for example, they say you can't leave your house more than 5 miles, you try and buy a bottle of water 6 miles from home, you won't be able to. I'm not kidding. That's so many reasons why you should retain cash. It's offensive that the politicians believe that they have a right to all of your information at all times. With you lose.
All right, so there you go. He's right. I mean, as we're moving away from cash, people are thinking, well, I don't want the government in my face all the time. At least not so. I don't want government in my face. I don't want government knowing exactly, everything I'm spending my money on. It's bad enough that they're taxing, that they have a sales tax that we have to pay. But to what degree is this becoming a factor in the recent surge in Bitcoin prices?
I don't know. My contrarian view that I've discussed this in many different Bitcoin spaces on Twitter and all that sort of stuff is I don't think we're going to see CBDCs. I mean, maybe we will for a short period of time. And you know what they say? The strongest form of protest is absorb and amplify. And I can't wait until whichever Western jurisdiction goes first for the world's hackers to unite to hack the centralized CBDC and the wallet addresses of our politicians to find out where they're getting their money from, because that's what it's going to lead to. It's a double-edged sword for them. Yeah, the bureaucracy would be able to see everybody else's transactions, but the world's techies will also have access to what they're doing. And there's one thing the banking sector and politicians need. They need some opacity. They need some opaqueness, and they're not going to be willing to give that up. So I really don't see CBDCs as an actual threat. What I do see, and I think we've discussed this once before, the possibility of governments, hopefully they have some sort of wisdom, and they understand that CBDC is not the way to go. But what they will do is offer an FDIC-insured Bitcoin wallet and allow the commercial banking sector to distribute an FDIC-insured wallet. That would allow them to have access to see, for those people who want a custodial wallet and aren't comfortable with the tech and don't really care, they'll be able to have it. And the rest of us who want to be self-custodial and want to run our own nodes or our own hardware or even hot wallets will be able to do so. I think that's more than likely.
So you're going to see more so-called normal people get into Bitcoin, and presumably that's what's going. Is that who's buying it? I mean, are you hearing that it's mostly newbies getting in, or is it the people who've already been in Bitcoin just adding to their positions?
I think you see both, right? But what I do see is a trend that I've never seen to this degree before. There was a bit of a bump around the Freedom Convoy when people saw that the government caused a bank run in Canada because it froze people's accounts and credit cards and all their assets, and people just got nervous and went out and started buying Bitcoin. They didn't buy a lot because they're new; they're just trying to figure it out. So there was a little bit of a bump there regionally in Canada. But now, since in the United States, we see the banking sector potentially collapsing. Credit Suisse, I think, really scared people. A lot of people in the financial sector, as you know, have been really concerned about the possibility of Deutsche Bank imploding. And I heard this morning that of the $6 trillion banks that exist on the planet, there's $6 trillion commercial banks. One of them is in deep trouble and about to explode. And the six are JP Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and two others. So you know the main six. One of them, and we don't know who, is in very, very serious trouble. And CNBC has stopped reporting on the credit default swaps as of within the past month or a couple of months, something like that. So something's up, and they know something's up, and they're trying to hide it. And all of that just fuels suspicion and sentiment and people looking for an off-ramp. And this is exactly what Bitcoin was created for. This is why it's decentralized. You know, there's some people in the Bitcoin space on Twitter, they joke all the time that maybe Joe Biden or maybe Jerome Powell can call the CEO of Bitcoin and get their executives in and talk to them. You know, the reality is there's no such thing for people who don't understand. There's nothing. It's a protocol. You log on to the internet using the TCP/IP protocol. Bitcoin is a financial distributed protocol. That's all it is, and there's no point of failure, and that's why it's seen as a protection against the fiat circus.
Are you hearing predictions about Bitcoin going to 100K? I mean, is this? It peaked at 69,000 US, wasn't it?
Yes, there was. So there was a podcast that was both a Twitter space and a podcast hosted by Robert Breedlove. I describe Robert Breedlove for the normies. He's kind of like, I describe him as maybe the Jordan Peterson of the Bitcoin space. Now, it's not entirely accurate, but that's the way he's adored amongst Bitcoiners, the way Jordan Peterson is adored. And he hosted a podcast. I can't remember the guy's name. It's on top of my tongue. He's a very well-known guy in the space. He's predicting a $1 million Bitcoin in very recent time. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be at the level of, you know, parabolic growth that he predicted, because that would bring into some other challenges. But I encourage people to go to Robert Breedlove's podcast. It's called What is Money? And they talk about the philosophy of money and the background of money and all of our all the different attributes that we have in our financial system. And you'll hear that long debate and discussing. And this is somebody from the financial sector we're not talking about, Joe Schmo off the street. So we're seeing all sorts of calls across the board. We don't know, because nobody knew what was going to happen with 2008. We see that there's the potential for another economic downturn. I'm not so sure it's going to be sustained, but there is the potential. And if there is, in 2008, Bitcoin didn't exist. That's why it was created. Well, this will be yet another test, much like the Freedom Convoy was, to see if Bitcoin is that safe haven that it's been designed to be.
Can you still buy stuff? I mean, you can, right? Some, but that's been the knock against Bitcoin for the longest time, is it's just not readily usable. I mean, are you seeing an expansion in sort of the practical uses of Bitcoin in terms of what you can buy with it?
It depends where you are in the world. That's a very Western, and the SJWs like to use the word privileged. It's a very Western sort of privileged perspective, because we live in a culture where we haven't had to sustain a dollar collapse and implosion, right? But if you go to other countries around the world, different regions, whether it's Nigeria or El Salvador, where they've made it legal tender, then yeah, in places like El Salvador, you can buy absolutely anything just about in Bitcoin. This is why Jack Dorsey's company, which is a payment processor that processes for Visa and debit and all that sort of stuff, they also have a rail to be able to pay with Bitcoin. An exchange that I told you about, ShakePay, which is from Canada, they do have a Visa card that will instant convert based on the Bitcoin that you put on their in their account. You basically buy Bitcoin, they hold it in Bitcoin, but you can go pay it with the ShakePay Visa, and it instantly converts from Bitcoin into dollars to use it. So there's a whole bunch of mechanisms that are out there, but people do.
Back up a little bit. I want to ask you about that because
Yeah.
it sounds so. You don't have to have cash in your account in order to buy Bitcoin. If you got one of these credit cards, they'll buy the Bitcoin for you, and then you're expected to pay it in cash. Is that? Do I have that right? And cover the cost of your credit card? Like you've got a debit balance. Then.
So I'll give you an example.
All
This
right.
is This is an example of. Well, let me get it for you. This is an example of a ShakePay credit card, and that is linked to my ShakePay account. So I transfer in money, I buy Bitcoin, I move off the exchange whatever I don't want to keep on the exchange, and then if I go into the local coffee shop or whatever and I want to pay using my Bitcoin, I just scan this ShakePay Visa card, and it instantly converts whatever the conversion rate is at that point from Bitcoin into dollars and pays it. So there's so many different rails that are being developed. I mean, this is the benefit of being a tech-orientated industry. What was not able to do a month ago is now something you're able to do today. Like things are growing so quickly.
Still talk about banning mining, for instance. There was this from Bitcoin News, which obviously is very pro-Bitcoin, but banning Bitcoin mining is ineffective because of corruption in the Chinese Communist Party. Bitcoin miners are the #1 employer in Rockdale. I'm not sure what the connection between those two statements is, but what they're saying is this talk of banning Bitcoin mining in China is never going to happen. And my sources, if you want to call them that, say that it's not happening, that China's almost pretty much given up on this. I mean, it's still technically illegal, but they're not enforcing it. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, and that's been for quite some time. And you know what else is going to be interesting? The follow-up bill, when they decide how much electricity you use for your microwave and how much electricity you use for, I don't know, your fridge or the rest of your utilities. Like, what are they, crazy? Like, it's you plug in your computer, or if you're mining, you're using, I don't know, an ASIC miner or a computer that has multiple GPUs to it. Whatever, it's your electricity. You get to decide what you use your electricity for. Or do we want to go down the full menu of communist authoritarianism? Because that's what that is.
Benjamin Dichter joining us on Saga 960, talking about the surge in Bitcoin prices. Now, whenever we talk, you tend to ignore the volatility of Bitcoin. I mean, you don't want to go there, generally speaking. I'm not saying that you never go there. You will under prodding by people like myself, because for us, it's all about, well, look what it's doing relative to the US dollar or the Canadian dollar. But I mean, for Bitcoin people like yourself, it's the fiat currencies that you should be looking at in terms of questioning whether or not they're going to be around 20 years from now, 30 years from now. There's a huge push to elevate the yuan internationally. As scary as that is for those who believe fervently that the greenback should be the reserve currency from now until eternity, there's a growing push, probably because you've got a terrible administration in the form of Joe Biden and company running the United States, unless, of course, you believe he's a puppet, which many people do.
Oh, come on. You don't think a dementia patient could do that well? I'm shocked. I think he's doing amazingly well, given
Under
his
the
circumstances.
circumstances. Yeah. Well, they put words in his mouth, and sometimes he gets them right.
Yeah.
But what happens if all of a sudden the U.S. currency, the greenback, which has been the default reserve currency around the world, that's what countries use. I mean, even if it has nothing to do with the United States. Canada will use the U.S. currency in buying certain items. Other countries will use the U.S. currency, and that has elevated the United States to the position where it is now because they've been able to get rich, largely because of this currency stuff. But what happens if the yuan becomes the reserve currency, or it becomes a currency that more and more countries are agreeing to use, like the Russians, for instance? If I'm not mistaken, I think the yuan is being used in trading between Russia and China in terms of their oil purchases. Could be wrong about that, but that's what I'm hearing. Do you have you considered the possibility? I mean, if that happens, it's quite possible that the greenback will plummet. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a fantasy. So there's a couple of things at play there. First, Russia and China. Let's look at Russia's economy, for example. Russia's economy is a fraction of what Canada's economy is. If it weren't for the fact that they're always trying to make Putin the boogeyman because they have nuclear weapons, it's one of the most irrelevant countries in the planet, as far as I'm concerned. And that's why they need to partner with China, which is China as well, is still a fraction of the United States economy. It's growing tremendously, but we've discussed before it being a paper dragon. They can't afford their own electricity. It's collapsing internally. So I'm not terribly worried. Of course, they have to band together to have a hope against the US dollar. But then also in the commercial banking sector globally, there has been a massive shortage of of the euro dollar. If you know, the euro dollar market is US dollars that are used in the euro market. There has been a shortage of like 70% shortage of euro dollars for years. Like this has been going on for a while. They just can't get enough US dollars. And why is that? Because it doesn't matter what country you travel to around the world, whether you're a tourist or you're doing business, big business or small business, people want to do business in the euro, with US dollars. They don't want to use yuan. Walmart doesn't want to buy stuff with yuan. People want to use the US dollar because at the end of the day, despite dementia Biden's issues, the structure of the US, which the Chinese are trying to subvert and destroy, is still quite robust. They have 50 states that have relative autonomy from the federal government on a number of issues. And you saw that during COVID with Florida and Texas and Mississippi and other jurisdictions. It's a fantasy to think that they're going to shift away from the whole world. Is just the people in Cuba are going to decide, oh, we don't want euro dollars anymore. We want these, funny notes of these letters we can't read with Xi's picture on. Like, that's just not going to happen. That's not how people behave.
Well, I mean, if you print enough dollars, though, I mean, we're talking about trillions. That's what Peter Schiff, who's a very well-known gold bug.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, speaking of which, we had that little bit of a surge. I think it went up to like $2,020, and then boom, right back down again. So for those who believe that precious metals is the way, as I have for decades, it certainly is disappointing to see gold not make the kind of surge. I mean, people are going to say, well, wait a minute, gold has done very well. It has done well, but I just don't see it doing what Bitcoin is doing. At least I stand to be corrected. Let's talk about AI. What does AI have to say about the latest Bitcoin surge or bubble? So I guess they've got these, robo analysts. It's 2021 all over again, at least for veteran cryptocurrency Bitcoin. After tanking in the wake of the FTX scandal last fall, Bitcoin has, as well as other cryptocurrencies, rebounded nicely up. Get this, over 67% in 2023. It's almost as if the nightmare of 2022 is just that, a nightmare that we've all woken up from. Crypto may be a new kind of asset, but its most recent activity proves an age-old investment adage: buy low, sell high. And if you bought Bitcoin at its post-scandal low of about $16,000, consider yourself a savvy investor. Bitcoin continues to elude us. People still don't get it in the investment world. Is that true? Are you finding that? I mean, you mentioned earlier about somebody in the financial world who was saying, hey, $1 million Bitcoin is going to happen one day. But do you find that there are still massive numbers of people? Obviously, the Berkshire Hathaway folks are the biggest example, who will never get Bitcoin and don't want to get it.
Yeah, if I want to buy a train company, I'm going to ask Warren Buffett. But he missed Apple, he missed Microsoft, he missed Google, he missed Amazon, he missed every tech growth stock that ever existed. All the FANG stocks he missed because he knows nothing about tech, and that's fine. That's not his specialty, which is great. But at the same time, that's why when he talks about Bitcoin, I in one ear out the other. I know he doesn't understand it, so there's no point. There's a lot of people, younger people in the hedge fund industry, in the investment industry, people who are open-minded. Good macro investors know they need to be open to new different things. They're the ones who are the trailblazers in the financial sector that got onto Bitcoin or getting onto Bitcoin now. I talk frequently, actually spoke this morning with Greg Foss, and many of those people you often see in the Bitcoin space that, they've got into this a few years ago. They understand what it is because they can do the math. They understand how this issue is, how this asset is, that it's a new asset class that never existed before. It solved the Byzantine generals problem, which has been a logistics problem that is as old as humanity, dating back to the Sumerians. And Bitcoin is the first piece of technology to actually solve that problem. And that's why it's difficult for people to really grasp how significant Bitcoin is and how it's going to change the world. In terms of AI, I don't know, man. It's AI. You know how AI works? AI is it's an algorithm that's a word prediction model. That's all it is. It's just a reflection of what we're saying on the internet. And it just, it uses a probability circuit to figure out what's the next word going to be in the sentence. It's a reflection of us. It's not actually informative or sentient.
Let's talk about the state of the world right now. I mean, you've got massive riots in France, you've got ongoing riots in the Netherlands. How do you see it playing out in a world where you've got, frankly, a lot of pushback by people who don't want to be controlled by the globalists? And so do you see Bitcoin as a go-to source for those people because they no longer trust their government? And so as a result of that, what are we seeing? We're seeing scenes out of France that are just astonishing, like this, for instance. I mean, it just never ends.
Well, that's the French doing what the French do, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just about raising the age for retirement. That's what the left was saying, and it's all about that. But no, there's a lot more to it than that. The French have had it. They're done. And so they're pushing back against this globalist bozo, Emmanuel Macron. But the fact that we're seeing so much, in the way of protests around the world, do you see that playing into the Bitcoin price at all?
Yes. So let's start with a statement on the Netherlands. So one of the things that I and many other people have been very concerned about and have been speaking more openly about is how the Freedom Convoy itself was co-opted and why that's important. And this is why it's relevant to all of you. The protesters in the Netherlands watched us in Canada at the Freedom Convoy, and they saw how the government reacted, and they prepared, and they were proactive, and to make not the same mistakes that we ran into, or just to avoid the same problems that we ran into. Now, what was the result of that? The result of that was there's been an election, and this is what we got robbed of in Canada, by the way. Not even, and this wasn't our goal, but this is what we got robbed of. In the Netherlands, they recently had an election. And what happened in that election? The BBB party, which doesn't stand for Build Back Better, it's the opposite. It's the Farmers Party. They rallied together. They formed their own political party, and they now were elected to 20% of their parliament. So now all these Klaus Schwab, nitrogen bills, zero energy, whatever that nonsense is, now they can veto any of this BS that comes through parliament. So they've gained political power. That's what we were robbed of in Canada. And that's why so many of us are still angry and we're not going to drop it, right? Because we had that opportunity. But the similarities between them and us and Bitcoin is they saw that in Canada, there was this great moment, a significant moment for Bitcoin that I think in 20 years, people are going to remember as the moment where in the Western world, under an increasingly authoritarian blackface moron and his administration, Bitcoin was the one money that functioned. It was the one money that couldn't be blocked. And they understood that. They saw that. And they utilized Bitcoin as well for their protests and to rally and to fund their protests. So yes, I think you're going to see a lot more adoption as people get increasingly more desperate against these clowns in government who have the inability to listen. They need to. All they do is focus on the lobbyists and the special interests, and people are so fed up to the point that people are willing to burn their government down to end it. And that's what's happening in France.
But not everybody's buying in. Here's one person responding to some of your comments.
To my comments?
Well, yeah. He's
Okay.
he's watching the video. He's saying, LOL, smart people don't fall for the Bitcoin scam.
Oh, yeah.
Just as smart people didn't fall for the Pierre Poilievre Bitcoin scam. Whatever. The only people still promoting Bitcoin are greedy grifters trying to recover their massive losses and dum-dums.
Yeah.
So are these? So I'm going to say that these are the people who are going to be buying Bitcoin when it's at 100,000 and 200,000,
and then complaining that they don't have much. I want to say to them, by the way, thank you for watching. First thing, but when Trudeau was elected, Bitcoin was $400. What else I got to say?
$400.
It was $400 a coin
back in 2015.
Yeah, when Trudeau was elected.
And people were saying the same thing back then.
That's, what? The entire time I've been telling people, buy Bitcoin at 1,000, at 2,000. No, Bitcoin's over or it's a bubble. It's over a bubble. Always, always. 6,000. No, it's over. 10,000. Oh, it can't go any higher. 12,000. Can't go higher. 30,000. 50,000. How can I get Bitcoin cheaper? I want to get Bitcoin now. I'm like, I told you.
Well, this is it. I mean, you want to buy low, and you don't want to be the person buying it. I don't know. Let's just say where it is now, like okay, 28, 29,000, and then having it take a massive hit. Not that you're against Bitcoin, but you want to be able to buy it at the lowest possible price. And so, given all the volatility, people keep waiting for a better deal, right? I mean, I bet you hear that all the time. Well, I'm just going to wait for it to come down. It's going to come down. It's going to,
always, and that's why I try. That's why I try to avoid price. And what sometimes I tell people is when they say, "What's the price of Bitcoin?" I say, "You're asking the wrong question. Where is Bitcoin in its cycle?" And then they say, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Okay, well, you need to go research Bitcoin because it goes in a 4-year cycle where there's a halvening every 4 years." And either dollar cost average or look at where it is in the halvening of its cycle. And we're just coming out of midway through the cycle is always when Bitcoin is at its lowest price. Always. Like clockwork. And what's happening right now? We're coming out of mid-cycle and Bitcoin once again is following the same trajectory. And I predict, if I was going to predict something, Bitcoin is going to be higher after the next halving, 6 months after the next halving. And when people ask me how much, I say, where is it in the cycle? That's all that's what I would recommend
can you
people.
give us a number? I mean, okay, so you talk
Nope.
it peaked, but peaked at 69,000.
Yeah.
Right? There was the halving, right? So
Happening, yeah.
and in fact, it went down to less than half because it was like around 18,000, right? 18, 19,000. So it was, I mean, it went down by about 2/3.
When I got into Bitcoin, I thought, all of us were thinking, if Bitcoin could only go back to $19,000, that would be crazy if we could get up to 19,000. I hope it happens again. And then all of a sudden it made a jump from 3,000 to 6,000. And people like, oh, I wonder if it'll get to 10. Maybe it'll get to 10,000. Well, here we are at 28,000 and everybody's complaining. It's so funny. This is why people don't make decisions based on information and data. We make our decisions based on emotion, and emotional trading and emotional buying is what causes people to lose money. So forget the price, dollar cost average, stack Satoshis, and hold it for the long term.
1 million. Wow. Can you imagine $1 million?
Can you imagine 19,000? That would be crazy. I remember having that conversation with a friend of mine, you know.
Talk about your book before we wrap things up. How's it going? How's that going,
it's
Honking for Freedom?
It's going well. I have a Discord now, so I have a growing number of people that are in my Discord server. We're beta testing. A lot of them have read it. A couple of them just bought it the other day and wanted to join and talk to me about it. I did a Bitcoin. I've been doing a lot of podcasts lately. Did another Bitcoin podcast yesterday, and the guy from Massachusetts read it, loved it, especially the 2 chapters on Bitcoin. So I tell the Bitcoin story as it was relevant to the Freedom Convoy here. And I have yet to have a bad review. It seems to, it's been resonating with people on all sides of the spectrum, which is what I wanted to do. And in particular, one friend of mine, she said to me, my brother-in-law was anti-convoy, anti-mandate, pro-mandate, pro-everything, read the book, and he's now switched sides. Now he understands why freedom is important. So those sorts of endorsements are great. You can get it at honkingforfreedom.com, and it is now available on Apple Books as well as Amazon Kobo and Etsy.
Honking for Freedom.
Yeah.
BJ Dichter. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate this, as always.
Always. I love to. I'm here anytime you need me, brother.
All right. Thanks.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Bitcoin. There you go. $1 million one day. Wouldn't that be something? All right. Let's take a break. Back with more News Talk, Saga 960 and the Mark Patrol.